It only moves when the lights go out. I won't say exactly where this shopping mall is located, because the local police have already been combing the surrounding area for 3 months without success, searching for 3 missing teenagers whose bicycles were found abandoned at the entrance. Just know this: if your GPS suddenly starts glitching and reroutes you, suggesting a shortcut through an old concrete tunnel beneath the abandoned Oak Valley Mall, which doesn't appear on any modern paper map, turn around. Floor the gas so hard the rubber burns, break traffic laws, ignore the fines, but under no circumstances drive beneath that arch. It's not just a shortcut, it's a throat that swallows random travelers. My name is Alex, I'm 21, and I've always considered myself pragmatic to the core. That unfortunate Thursday, Highway 95 had turned into one endless, motionless river of red brake lights and exhaust fumes. The air inside my car had become dry and dusty. My phone's GPS let out an insistent chirp, offering an alternative route through the parking bypass. I knew that mall had been closed back in 2012 due to foundation issues and strange rumors about underground water. But at the time, the thought of sitting in traffic for 2 more hours felt like the biggest problem in the world. What irony! The entrance to the parking structure looked like the gaping mouth of a massive concrete beast whose teeth had been knocked out by time. The walls were covered in graffiti that, in the light of my halogen headlights, looked less like scribbles and more like warning signs in some forgotten, pre-human language. The road led lower and lower, spiraling into the very womb of the earth. The first level greeted me with shattered glass, the second with puddles of strange black liquid. On the third level, the lighting changed completely. Old fluorescent lamps beneath the low ceiling weren't just on. They pulsed in some sick, feverish rhythm. Dim, deathly yellow light alternated with absolute, thick darkness in a terrifyingly mathematical regularity. I drove slowly, almost crawling, listening to the echo of my engine bounce off the bare walls and return to me distorted. The air here was completely different. It felt heavy, stagnant, cold, and thoroughly soaked with the smell of old transmission fluid, damp lime, and something sweetly rotten. At some point, the concrete columns began to seem too identical, as if I were driving in circles in an endless loop. I pressed the gas pedal, feeling panic start to tickle my throat, desperate to see any sign of an exit. But at that exact moment, my Honda made a strange choking sound, jerked, and died. Silence crashed down on me instantly, like a falling concrete slab. It was so dense I could physically feel its weight on my shoulders. I frantically twisted the key in the ignition until my fingers hurt, but the starter only let out a weak, dry rasp that sounded deafening in the empty parking structure. My headlights flickered a few times and then went out completely, leaving me trapped between the blinking overhead lights that seemed to live a life of their own. Every second of darkness felt eternal. That was when, in that vacuum of sound, I heard it. Clack. A loud, sharp metallic noise, as if someone had struck a rusted hollow pipe with a massive hammer. It came from somewhere behind me, from the endless depth of empty parking rows where the shadows were especially thick. I froze, pressing myself into the seat as deeply as I could, afraid even to breathe. My vision sharpened to its limit. Clack, clack. The sound was disturbingly rhythmic, and after a few moments I realized the horrifying pattern. It matched perfectly with the flickering of the overhead lights. When the lights went out, the sound came. When the lights flared on, dead, ringing silence followed. Slowly, trying not to make a sound, I looked into the rearview mirror. In the brief instant when the lamps flickered and plunged the level into gray half-light, I saw it. Far away, maybe 100 meters behind my car, standing right in the middle of the lane, was a figure. It was tall, unnaturally thin, dressed in a dirty, faded orange road worker's jumpsuit that hung on its dried-out body like rags on a scarecrow. But the most horrifying part was above its shoulders. Instead of a human face, the creature had a solid, rough mask made of layered rusted iron, bolts, and gears that dimly glinted in the shadows. The light flared. The row behind me was empty, just bare concrete and the ugly shadows of columns. The light went out. Clack. The creature now stood 10 meters closer. It hadn't run. I hadn't heard footsteps. It simply shifted through space during the brief seconds when darkness hid it from my eyes. Each new clack vibrated through the floor beneath my feet. Horror in places like this isn't when you scream yourself hoarse. Real horror is when your vocal cords go numb and your brain starts registering details that shouldn't exist in the normal world. I sat gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white and the skin stretched thin. I understood. This clacker wasn't just approaching me. It was playing with me, waiting for my mind to finally break. The air inside the car was getting colder, and my breath escaped in thick clouds of vapor. I decided to test a mad theory. I reached to the right to turn on the flashlight on my phone, which I was absolutely certain I had placed on the passenger seat just minutes ago. But my fingers touched only the cold fabric of the seat. The phone wasn't there. A blinding flash of panic exploded in my mind. I had felt it in my hands. I had checked the GPS. Slowly, my neck vertebrae creaking, I turned my head to the right. My smartphone lay on the seat beside me, directly in the middle. Its screen suddenly lit up, displaying an incoming call from my own number. The name "me" pulsed on the screen in sync with the flickering overhead lights. The cold in my chest turned into piercing ice. Someone or something had been inside my car during the brief moment when I involuntarily squeezed my eyes shut from another flicker. It wasn't just outside anymore. The distance had become zero. The cabin now clearly smelled of old metal, machine oil, and cold, damp earth. On the inside of the windshield, right in front of me, a cloudy handprint slowly began to appear, long with unnaturally thin, multi-jointed fingers. Clack. The figure in the mirror was now only 3 meters from my trunk. In the brighter light, I saw that the clacker's mask wasn't just a piece of metal. It was made of hundreds of tiny mechanical parts constantly grinding against one another with a scraping noise. Rust flaked from its jumpsuit onto the concrete like dry scales from a dead snake. It had no eyes, yet I felt with every cell of my body that it was watching me with every one of its rusted gears. I clearly realized that if I stayed sitting in this tin can, I would die within the next minute. The starter was completely dead, the battery drained, but I noticed the car was on a slight incline. The only ghost of a chance at survival was to roll down to the even darker level -4 and try to start the car using momentum and the steep descent. It was madness, but the silence inside the car had become unbearable. Slowly, trying not to breathe, I released the handbrake. The Honda reluctantly began rolling backward, brake pads scraping heavily, straight toward the clacker. I turned the steering wheel, feeling its unusual weight without power steering, guiding the rear toward the dark void of the ramp. My eyes were locked on the mirror. Clack. A loud udar shook the roof of the car. The metal directly above my head bent inward with a deafening sound, and I saw the sharp, jagged edges of the creature's rusted mask slicing through the ceiling lining. It was on the roof. I felt its weight. The car sagged on its springs. With the last of my strength, I pressed the clutch and shifted into second gear. The car began gaining speed, rolling down the narrow, dark ramp into complete unknown. Clack, clack, clack. The sounds merged into a mad machine gun burst that made my ears ring. The creature furiously struck the windows with its long limbs, trying to tear the driver's door open. I was flying downward into absolute, pitch-black darkness of the lower level where the lamps had long since burned out. In that void, the clacker was master. I could hear its breathing, a dry, whistling sound of air passing through the rusted filters of its mask right behind me. At the most critical moment, when I felt long, burning cold fingers touch my neck through the torn hole in the roof, I suddenly released the clutch with force. The car jerked violently. The engine let out a dying, choking groan, coughed out a thick cloud of bluish smoke, and suddenly roared to life, filling the space with saving vibration. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor, feeling the car accelerate. The powerful forward jolt threw the creature off the roof. I heard a heavy metallic crash behind me, like a giant barrel of bolts slamming onto concrete at high speed. I didn't dare look back. I just gripped the wheel, trying to keep the car on course. I sped across the 4th level, knocking over trash bins and barely making the sharp turns of the concrete maze. Ahead, finally, there was light. Real, warm, golden sunset light pouring through the exit arch at the end of the tunnel. I burst out onto the street just as the sun was nearly touching the horizon, painting the world in crimson tones. I drove non-stop for another 30 miles until I reached the brightly lit, crowded parking lot of a huge 24-hour supermarket in a quiet suburb. I stepped out of the car and my legs gave way. With trembling hands, I examined the roof of my Honda. Deep, jagged, rusted gouges scarred it, as if it had been torn by enormous pincers, and the light-colored ceiling lining was ripped open like a tin can. But I was alive. I was safe. Later, sitting in my cozy, brightly lit living room, I tried to convince myself it had all been exhaustion and an overactive imagination. I picked up my phone to order food. The recent calls list was completely empty. But when I locked the screen and set it on the table, in the deathly silence of the room there came a faint mechanical sound. Clack. I froze, feeling the hair rise on the back of my neck. The sound didn't come from the hallway, came from my own pocket. Slowly, holding my breath, I pulled out the phone. On the black screen appeared one new text message from an unknown number. Contained only 3 short words. "We are always inside." I looked at my palms. Beneath my fingernails was fine, barely visible reddish dust. Dust that smelled of rust and century-old dampness. I survived, but now I know the terrible truth. Every time a light bulb in my house flickers for even a second, somewhere in that fleeting darkness behind my back, the clacker moves exactly one step closer. And I fear the day when the light in my room simply refuses to turn on. What if there wasn't just a scarecrow standing in the field, but your own doppelganger, getting closer every time you blinked? Ethan thought he could outsmart the straw monster until he felt dry corn kernels crunching under his own skin. Watch the full version on my YouTube channel.